the justices are smart enough to understand that striking down Trump's tariffs will only help him in the long run. I think that the tariffs case is also best understood as an opportunity for the court, yes, to say we're being independent, to flaunt its putative integrity, but also to save Trump from his worst instincts in a way that will improve the political fortunes of this White House and the Republican Party.
So you're expecting that on the tariffs, that the Supreme Court is going to side with Trump on the tariffs if you hold this view?
So not on tariffs, because I think there is a difference between spending and taxes. And I think that the Republican appointed justices probably hate taxes more than they love Trump. The tariffs case is interesting because it is entirely separate from these big questions about appropriations and separation of powers that I was just talking about to some degree. I mean, there are some common threads, but it's really about the interpretation of this Emergency Powers Act that Congress passed in 1977 that gives the president control over certain trade functions, including giving him the ability to regulate importation into the country. So no previous president has ever interpreted this law to allow for the willy-nilly imposition of tariffs. No president has ever said, hey, I could just use this to slap tariffs on any country I want for however long I want, for any reason I want. But Trump has. And that presents a real problem for the Supreme Court. First of all, because we're now talking about taxes on the American people. The justices know Econ 101. They do understand that a tariff is ultimately going to be paid, at least in large part, by American citizens. And they are very hostile to taxes. There was a case last year in which the Supreme Court actually came one vote away from destabilizing our entire federal income tax scheme. So these are not justices who love taxes, but also they spent most of the Biden administration sort of formulating and articulating this principle that presidents can't seize on some agenda item and then scour the existing law books for some statute that they can kind of use to squeeze through their policy. So we saw this when the court struck down Biden's eviction moratorium, Biden's vaccine mandate, his student loan forgiveness program, some of his climate regulations. Over and over again, the Supreme Court said, look, these are major questions. And when a president is enacting a policy that involves major questions, we expect Congress to speak very clearly, and Congress didn't speak clearly in those cases. And this case, the tariffs case, is the textbook example of major questions in play. Because if Congress had wanted to give the president unlimited power over tariffs, you'd think that it would say that pretty clearly. I mean, the Constitution vests the power of taxes and tariffs in Congress alone, not the president. So you'd think if Congress were giving up that power wholesale, that it would say it pretty clearly, and it didn't. So I do think that there is a real chance these justices will strike down the tariffs, and they'll use that to say, look how independent we are from Trump. We aren't only doing his bidding.
Hi, I'm Pat Morrison, one of the hosts of America at a Crossroads. If you like this video, don't just watch. Head over to our website where you can subscribe for early access to new programs, see our upcoming schedules, and connect directly with our guests in our weekly live streams. Thank you for watching.
But you'd said you thought their task was to try and make Trump a king. You would think if that's their goal, that then the tariffs would be a part of that. Or were you being hyperbolic with that?
No, what I would say is that the justices are smart enough to understand that striking down Trump's tariffs will only help him in the long run. I mean, these tariffs, I think the justices understand, are bad for the American economy. They're bad politics. They aren't polling well. They're making everything more expensive. I would say they're probably the single most unpopular item on his agenda. Every mainstream economist, many members of the business community, the corporate lobby, the Chamber of Commerce weighed in on this case against the Trump administration, even though they are usually allies of the Trump administration. And they said, look, Supreme Court, you need to draw the line here. And why is that? I mean, some of these parties just came out and said it. They were like, this is going to tank the economy. And I don't think that these justices want to see Trump and the Republican Party, by extension, flop so badly that Democrats, I don't know, win a Senate majority in the midterms. And then if Thomas or Alito want to step down, they can't because Democrats won't allow Trump to replace them. I think that the tariffs case is also best understood as an opportunity for the court, yes, to say we're being independent, to flaunt its putative integrity, but also to save Trump from his worst instincts in a way that will improve the political fortunes of this White House and the Republican Party.
Mark, in the past, haven't there been tariffs that have been enacted through presidential action? Now, is this only about trying to use the emergency provision as the vehicle for doing that, as opposed to a president having to keep total hands-off tariffs?
So great question. The answer is that there are, in fact, a number of statutes that allow the president to impose tariffs unilaterally, but they are narrower statutes than the emergency law that he has invoked here. They have a cap on how high the tariffs can be. They are limited in duration. They can't go on forever. They have to serve a particular purpose. Often the tariffs have to be preceded by a trade investigation. And so, like, in his first term, Trump used those statutes to impose various tariffs on China and other countries. In his second term, he came in and said, this is too small scale for me. I don't want to be limited by these statutes. I want to be able to do whatever I want. And that is when his lawyers seized on the Emergency Powers Act and interpreted it for the first time to allow him to slap tariffs on any country for however long. And that played against him in court because, this idea of the major questions doctrine that I was talking about, one of the things that the justices look at is, are there other statutes that the president could invoke to do a more modest version of this policy? And indeed, there were in all of those other cases. There were statutes that Biden could have used for more modest climate regulations, for smaller scale student loan forgiveness. And the logic of the court was, look, he can use those, but he can't just take this kind of vaguely worded emergency statute and use it to do whatever he wants. And I think that's the same principle that's going to be at play in the tariffs case.
Now, next week, we are off. There is no America at a Crossroads program in observance of Thanksgiving. 2 weeks from now, veteran diplomat and peace negotiator Aaron David Miller is with Mantle and Brand for an update on Israel and President Trump's plan for the Middle East.